This is a quick overview video of one-way and two-way pivot tables in Excel. So as an example, we're going to use this data set, which contains 32 cars. So each row you see here is a car, and each column is a characteristic about each car. And the two variables, which is another name for column in this case, two variables that we'll focus on are cylinder and gear. Okay, so now that we've gotten a sense for the data, let's go straight over to Insert and Pivot Table. And as you can see, Excel has automatically drawn this moving dotted line around my set of data. You could choose a subset of the data however you'd like using your mouse, but I'm satisfied with this, so I'm going to leave it. And that range of data is over here, as you can see in the table range field. So I'm going to leave that as it is. I want my pivot table in a new worksheet, so I'm going to leave this as it is. And then I'm going to click OK. And what it's done here is it's made a new worksheet for me. I'm going to rename that. I'll call it pivot table so that we know what it is. And then I have my pivot table controls over on the right here. So as I told you, the first variable I'm interested in is cylinder. And so we are going to make a one-way pivot table using cylinder. And so what I want to do is drag cylinder into the rows here. And then in this example, for values, I don't want sum, which is what has been put here by default. But instead, I can click here, click value field settings, and I'll choose what I want, which is count. So I'm going to click OK. And now we see the distribution of our 32 cars in our data across the various possible values here of cylinder. So what this tells us is that out of all the 32 cars, 11 of those cars right here have 4 cylinders. Then 7 cars have 6 cylinders, and the remaining 14 cars have 8 cylinders. Now, let's say I want a percentage breakdown of the cylinders that the various cars have. Then what I can do is I can go up here, and I'm going to drag cylinder here again. And by default, it puts the sum, but we're going to change that. I'm going to change this to count. Then I'm going to go to the Show Values As tab here, and I'm going to change this to percentage of grand total. So I'll click OK. And now you'll see a column has been added right here. And so what this is telling us, for example, is that these 7 cars, which have 6 cylinders, they make up 21.8% of all of the cars. So that's how you can quickly summarize your data using a one-way pivot table. Now we'll turn to a two-way pivot table. So the first thing I'm going to do is, for now, I'm going to get rid of the percentages that I had put in. So I'll click Remove Field here. So now we're back to our initial one-way pivot table. And as I said before, the other variable we're interested in is gear. So I'm going to move gear now to the columns. And what we've done here is now we have put both variables into a two-way table. So I'll quickly go through an example or two. So here, for example, we have 8 cars which have 4 cylinders and 4 gears. Down here, we have 0 cars. The blank space means a 0. We have 0 cars that have 8 cylinders and 4 gears. Now, one thing I want to point out is that here it says count of cylinders. I'm going to remove that, and instead I'm going to put gear over here, the other variable we're interested in, and I'm going to go back to value field settings, change it to count, which is what we want. Click OK. What you'll see is that we have the exact same table here that we had before. So it may be a little confusing, but when you're looking at just counts, you can have either variable, the sil or the gear, selected over here, and it'll give you the same thing. So just one thing to point out that might often be confusing. Okay, the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to look at row percentages and column percentages. So I'll start with column percentages, and the procedure is really similar to what we did before. So I'm going to drag gear. I could have dragged cylinder as well over here, then go back here, select count, show values as. I think I said we'd start with column, so I'll click OK. And now you see we have column totals added here. And so I'll run through an interpretation of this. And before I do that, one important thing to note is that the output can get a little messy. So just keep in mind that everything I've put in that box right there, all of that is referring to cars which have 3 gears. All of this refers to cars that have 4 gears, and all of this refers to cars that have 5 gears. So now let's look at one of these. And since we're on 5, we'll just start there. So what we're saying here in this column is that out of just the cars that have 5 gears, 40% of those cars have 4 cylinders, 20% of those cars have 6 cylinders, and 40% of those cars have 8 cylinders. And that's all there is to it. So now we've calculated percentages, but separately, disaggregating the cars by a gear. Now we'll kind of do the opposite. So I'm going to click here, remove this field, drag it again. I could have perhaps just changed the settings, but I did it again. So value field settings changes to count, show values as. This time I'm going to choose row total instead of column total. Hit OK. And now what we have is that we can focus on the rows. So now I've disaggregated the data by cylinders instead of by gears in terms of the percentages we see here. So once again, it's important to note that this box refers to all the cars that have 3 gears. These are all the cars that have 4 gears. These are all the cars that have 5 gears. But this time we're going to look row by row. So I'll do one example. Let's go down here. Now we're saying of all the cars that have 8 cylinders, 85% of those cars that have 8 cylinders have 3 gears. 0% still of the cars that have 8 cylinders have 4 gears. And finally, the remaining 14.3% of the cars that have 8 cylinders have 5 gears. So these are just a few quick ways to slice your data and learn more about it just within Excel itself. Finally, I'll show you, if you wanted to, you can drag gear down here again and value field settings, count. You could put the column totals back in, and then you end up with a very large table in which this area shows you all of the information about cars that have 3 gears, and then you look at each row that correspond with these various cells, and now you have the column percentages and the row percentages all added in. It's a little hard to read, which is why earlier I demonstrated them separately. So that's everything for now. Hopefully this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.